The Child Psych podcast brings to you the top parenting and mental health experts in the world, designed to educate and inspire you with current research and concrete strategies that foster resiliency and healing in children and teens. Most importantly, we're here because we need to raise a generation of children who don't need to recover from their childhoods.
Hi everyone, I'm Tammy.
And I'm Tania.
And we're with the Child Psych podcast.
We're so incredibly excited to welcome Dr. Cindy Hovington. Welcome, Cindy.
Hi. Thank you for having me. I am looking forward to our conversation. Absolutely love your work and excited for this.
Let's start with the introduction. So Dr. Hovington has a Bachelor of Science degree in clinical exercise physiology and a master's in rehabilitation science from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She completed a postdoctoral fellow at McGill in education. She received her PhD in neuroscience, also from McGill. She is also the founder of Curious Neuron.
It's interesting because if you look at the blog posts around like 2017, I had just had my second child, and that's when I launched the blog. And I was focusing a lot on child development. Like if the parents just knew like how their child's brain functions, that's all they need as tools. They'll be good. They'll know how to parent. And I was so wrong. I was so wrong. And so there was a pivot in Curious Neuron where I realized we had to approach parenting in a holistic approach. And the more I started reading about that, taking care of myself, talking about the research of self-compassion and mindfulness and the parent, stress and their emotions, then I was applying it to myself, and then things started changing. I around my second child, I struggled with my mental health as well. And I was yelling a lot. I wasn't parenting the way I had envisioned, but I was like, why? I don't want to do this. And then I would yell, and I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. But I wasn't doing anything to stop it. But then when I started the work and digging into the research and helping parents by sharing my journey, then that really helped me become that parent that I had envisioned. We all have moments. I don't want to pretend that things are perfect. But in general, like just the working on skills like emotion regulation skills, something that I had not learned as a child, giving those skills to my child, my 3 children now, just helps a lot. And I've applied everything that I read.
I think that's the misconception. Like we run the Institute and we've been in private practice and you're doing this, your work. Yeah, we're not perfect parents. Like I don't want any misconstrued information that Tania and I are sitting there on some soapbox being like, parent of the year.
Yeah.
Half the reason we learn from our mistakes and then we put it in our courses. Like that's what we do.
Exactly.
We figure this out and we try to translate what we've learned and we pivot and we're like, oh yeah, like we know better. We should probably go back to what we're supposed to be doing instead of getting frustrated our kid and rolling our eyes at them.
And which we do. It doesn't matter what degree or background you have, how many kids you have, you're going to do that. And I think that's why for me, what's been important that I think mostly this past year, I've really shared my struggles and my journey and my good days and my bad days, because we all have them. And as parents, you can have all the research you want, but sometimes you just want to feel less alone and you want to feel seen. And like I'll have on Sundays, like, am I the only one in my stories on Instagram? And like parents will put like, they'll write things like, am I the only one that is, I don't know, hates playing with my child, and there's nothing wrong with that. I wish like we would just avoid the judgment and realize that parent is doing the best they can. And we don't have to like every single aspect of it, but how do we manipulate and change things? Let's say you like rainbow wooden toys, then get that for yourself. Put that in your child's environment, right? Like we matter too. And we forget that as parents.
We can't fill from an empty cup. Our mental health is taken care of and our spiritual health and our physical health. And so we can be available.
Cindy, it's part of your work that I really love. And, as parents talking about those tough moments, could you talk a little bit about the science behind a tantrum for us?
Yes, I love talking about tantrums. It's our biggest challenge, right? Like our child. And the most difficult part is that we'll give our child something they asked for and they have a tantrum sometimes. And you're like, I don't get you. We don't see that as adults. So basically what happens is that in the brain, when our child is born, their emotions are functioning, everything is there. And then they're 2 years old and now they're asking for certain things. And the brain's amygdala, where the emotions are produced, it's going to create frustration at 100%. It's going to create anger and sadness, all of these like high levels. and it's going to talk to the prefrontal cortex behind our forehead, and that's going to say, now what do I do with this emotion? But the problem is that when they're very young, that part of the brain hasn't fully developed. It's actually in their 20s, right? It's gonna fully develop. So that part of the brain doesn't know what to do with it. So it's gonna show it at 100%. It's not going to regulate it and bring it down to a certain level. It's going to show everything that it is, and the child doesn't have all the right tools yet. Which is why I always tell parents, you don't want to discipline an emotion. You really want to figure out what's happening. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. There's a lot that we can talk around, like discuss around that. But really the science is that a child is going to put those emotions out there, and there are skills and there are tools they have to learn. As they get older, they're focused, or their concentration skills will change. They'll be able to disconnect. Let's say a sibling takes their toy away. With the level of the brain, let's say at around a year and a half, they're going to focus in hard on the fact that they're upset that the toy was taken away. Versus when they're older, they're able to inhibit and block certain parts of the emotion or the attention being focused on one thing and say, okay, well, I'm really disappointed with you. I don't like you right now, but I'm going to go play with that other truck, right? So they're able to disconnect and disassociate from that moment. And that's a skill that comes with time. So we have to give it time sometimes too, and just realize that all these big emotions are part of their development, but that we need to offer them skills and tools to help them with those emotions.
I think what you're saying is that part of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, that upstairs brain, as Dr. Daniel Siegel would call it, is poorly developed. So it can't send those messages to the lower part, that amygdala, that emotional brain, to say, you know what, we can just go get another toy. We can handle this feeling. It's we're not going to die from this experience, but the amygdala doesn't get those messages. So it's like the world is ending. Exactly. This is the end of the
Worst
line
day ever. Exactly. And the tone that you just said now, you as the parent, you have to act as that prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, the external prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. And which is why I love what you just said, because that's what the prefrontal cortex would tell us, right? Like if our partner or our boss says something and we're really upset, we're not going to flip the table in front of our boss, like, right? Like, but because our brain will say, don't do that. I know you want to, but don't do that. We might yell, we might, whatever it is, but we're going to tone it down a little bit, and our kids can't do that. So like you were saying, we have to kind of tell our child, like, it's okay. You know, let's take a breath. Let's move away from that. Anyways, there's a lot around that, but just helping them regulate that emotion until they're able to do it on their own.
Yeah, you know, what's so interesting, I think all three of us know that for the past decade, the most common disciplinary technique has been timeouts. And when we look developmentally where a child is, it's just impossible for them to sit in their bedroom and go, okay, how should I have handled that? What should I have done instead?
Yeah, they can learn to numb out and like, well, like, I'm by myself and no one comes when I cry, so I don't want to waste this energy crying. And the emotions can get, well, we dissociate then, like you numb out. But you know, that expecting that positive self-talk where they can like self-soothe, we're like, you don't self-soothe without a prefrontal cortex. Like that, you can, that's why infants and self-soothing is BS. Like they don't do that.
Yes. But you know, even I would even argue as an adult sometimes, I think I learned that pretty late in terms of like really calming myself, my inner voice and the words I was using for myself. I just recently learned all that. So I think we have to really, and I love that you're bringing that up, because there's still this debate around like timeout, and it's not a monster. It's not, I don't see it as like something super bad. I don't do it and I don't recommend it, because I think that we need to find ways, like you said, that you put a child in the corner or that timeout chair, whatever it is, what are they learning from that moment, right? Like I would take my children away from a situation if somebody got hurt. I would remove them and say, I'm protecting you and I'm protecting your brother or your sister. I have 3 kids, 2 boys and a daughter. And then I would deal with the person who's hurt. So are you okay? Let me take care of you. And the other one, I would come back to them right after. You hurt her, you hit her, right? I see that you're upset because she wanted the toy and she's not sharing with you, and trying to keep it really short, but showing them that I saw what the underlying emotion was. They were frustrated, they were disappointed, they were angry because of whatever reason, but that is not the way to behave. You know, there's the internal part of the emotion, and then there's the external, which is what we see as adults as the behavior. We see our child behaving a certain way, and we focus on the behavior so much, but we forget there's the underlying emotion, perhaps of, like I said, frustration or disappointment. So teaching our kids not just the words around emotions, because some parents will tell me, yeah, my child knows every single emotion, but they still can't regulate. There's a lot more to it. Once they are able to identify these emotions, because we've said them so often, like this child, let's say, who hit their sibling, well, what have I taught them to do in that when they feel or experience that emotion, right? So we have to show them that when you're frustrated to that level, it's not okay to hit. And putting them in a timeout is just taking them away from the situation. But we have to remember that there has to be some sort of learning, because they're just going to repeat it.
I think the biggest thing is kids get frustrated because they don't have the tools to work with the problem yet either.
Yeah.
So that upstairs brain needs tools. It's like, okay,
Yes.
well, this is this feeling. And when this happens, what do I do instead? But if we just give them punishment and say, don't do that, kiddo's like, well, what the heck am I supposed to do when my brother takes my toy? Like,
Yeah.
if
I
I
don't
can't
have a solution.
my brain still doesn't have an answer yet. It still has questions, and all it knows is now like, okay, well, don't do that, but it's going to it might do the same thing or try something different that is also not appropriate.
When those tantrums do happen for our parents, what do they need to do? So often they're told to just breathe. Tell us about that.
Yeah. That doesn't work, right?
No.
I know. I get parents that email me too, and they're like, so I was breathing a lot and nothing changed. My child is still there. I think there's this really big misconception when it comes to talking about breathing. Breathing is very important. Most of us don't know how to breathe, including myself. I'm still learning, because there's like a type of breathing. It's not just like taking a deep breath. You have to practice breathing, and my deep breath might not bring in the right amount of oxygen to the body. So the breathing is important, but there's so much more, because if I'm breathing, but in my head, I'm saying this is the worst kid ever or the worst day ever, why does this happen to me? Then that inner language and dialogue is going to change how I respond. Even if I breathe deeply and properly and followed all the techniques, that inner dialogue is going to change. Or that self-compassion piece. That's something that I've been pushing hard recently, because I had spoken to a researcher in Europe, and he was like, he studied mindfulness and emotion regulation skills, and self-compassion was what he said stood out. Like, just teaching physicians who will work in the ER about self-compassion, they were able to bring down their stress levels, thinking like, okay, it's a hard day today. There's a lot of people here and I'm tired, I'm stressed, but I'm not the only one. Everybody around me is going through the same thing. And I think as parents, we need to start bringing that in a bit. So the breathing is a small part of it. But again, and even if you practice the self-compassion and you practice mindfulness, which is self-compassion, and you practice emotion regulation skills on yourself, and you're really cool, calm, and collected when your child has tantrums, if you don't teach them the skills, then that's just going to continue. So it's a lot of work.
When it comes to how emotions were dealt with in our own home, will influence that. So if, we were told to knock it off and you're such a baby. And so we have that. I mean, parents have to, I think, be aware of what the messages they were told about big displays of emotions and leaving space for that. But I also will say things to myself like, my child has a lot of stress hormones, and this is the only way to get them out. This is the only way for his body to drain those toxins right now. Or I'm giving my child a gift I never got when I was a child. I was never allowed to cry like that. And he will learn that it's okay to show emotion, and it's okay to express your feelings. And
my mantra is actually be the thermostat. Be the thermostat, Tanya,
not the
thermometer. Be the thermostat. Just
co-regulation.
So, but I love what you're saying today too, Cindy, is that breathe, calm yourself, calm your face, then your child will calm. And it's really not that simple.
No, I think it's important that we say that, because a parent might listen to this or other, like advice and say like, okay, if I just breathe or I just do this, everything will be fine. But even within yourself, I know the research, but it doesn't mean that I won't get upset with my kids because I know the research. No, it depends on myself that day. If I had a really big argument with somebody or a family member, or have a really stressful day and I'm behind on my work, I will not respond to my kids the same way that if I were well rested and happy and not stressed. So I think we have to realize that within these tantrums that we have a role in a way that we have to take care of ourselves. We spoke about that before, but this is like when it comes to taking care of yourself, it's a lot more than just stepping out. Because I would do this after I had my third child. I would say, I just need to step out, and when I come back, I'll be okay. And I would come back and still scream and still lose it and still feel overwhelmed. It was more around the idea of just being aware of how my brain functions. And I was raised in a home where there was a lot of screaming. It was just negative all the time. My parents got divorced when I was very young, and it just was not a good marriage from the beginning. So my brain, like if something drops within my home, I will jump very easily. So I have a brain that will respond very differently to a child screaming or having a tantrum. Let's say like my husband. My husband came from this really harmonious family and everything, like a big Italian family, and just calm, and his brain will not respond the same way. And I think it's important that we realize that there's a foundation of how our brain learned to deal with stress and to function around these situations. So it's not your fault technically if you lose it right away and you're like, why? I'm breathing now, I'm doing everything. Maybe you need to go back and retrain your brain. And I went to therapy because I had to deal with all the past and how that impacted me, because without doing that, I would still be the same parent that I was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have changed.
I remember going through therapy till I was 8 months pregnant because I was so scared that I would be a yeller like my dad. And I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I've got to like work through that stuff before I'm going to give birth to my first child.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, I don't want to repeat these patterns. And I know not everyone has that luxury, but at least having self-compassion and be like, these are the hard stories. Like these are our stories that we bring into our parenting. And so it's that first step is that self-awareness you're talking about, just noticing, yeah, I want to yell because that's what my parents did. This just makes sense. When things are hard, we yell. That was this tool we were given. When there's conflict, we yell. So, or we're told like we can't show feelings. So when our kids have feelings, we want to shut them down because we're really uncomfortable because we haven't walked those neural pathways.
In parenting, there has to be a shift where instead of looking at the behavior, we look at ourselves. And then exactly what you're saying, we look underneath. So underneath that iceberg to see what's actually happening for this child here. What do they need right now?
We are so excited to announce ICP's Children's Mental Health and Parenting Conference. The 2-day online event will take place on November 26th and 27th, 2022. The conference keynote address will be by Dr. Lara Markham, who will talk on parenting for resiliency. Over the next 2 days, there are 14 half and full day workshops led by experts on a variety of topics, including highly sensitive children, childhood trauma, holistic mental health, childhood anxiety, classroom mental health, technology, divorce, empowering learners, compassionate discipline, resiliency, autism, sexuality, trauma-informed yoga, and childhood ADHD. All workshops are recorded and available for 60 days. Additionally, these courses qualify for continuing education hours, and a certificate of completion can be obtained. The Institute's vision is that parents and professionals will walk away from the conference with a toolbox of new ideas and strategies to help children reach their fullest potential. Find out more now at icphelps.com.
I love the idea of the iceberg. For me, what I've applied in my own home is zooming out of my child and their behavior. Because I think sometimes as parents, we zoom in a lot and we say, this is the behavior they're exhibiting. They're hitting, let's say, or they're hitting their sibling. And that's the behavior I want to stop. How do I stop that behavior? And we forget that we need to take a couple steps back because there are so many parts of their environment that could be affecting that we might not realize. It might not just be a tool that we have to give them. That would be zooming in. It could be how we're responding to it. It could be our own emotions and mental health and stress levels that are impacting the child's environment. And now all of a sudden they're more angry or they don't know how to deal with this. It could be our relationship within the home right now, or maybe there's another family member and there's something happening within the home that's affecting the child. So I love the idea of looking below, because I always tell the parents the behavior they're exhibiting is communicating something. So what are they communicating?
So another one that now that we're on tantrums, is crying it out. Can you talk about the science of maybe why we shouldn't be encouraging parents to cry it out? I mean, that was, again, when we know better, we do better. So our parents, that was a big, I mean, it's still big in some circles, but this whole idea of crying it out is self-soothing. Can we go into that a little bit, demystify that and debunk that a little bit?
I always like to just apply it to adults. So if I'm really sad and I had the worst day ever, how soothing is it to have somebody just place their hand on you and be like, are you okay? Right? So the research uses 2 words every single time when you look at tantrums and emotions and how to support our children: responsive and sensitive. we have to keep that in mind. So if we're letting them cry and they're having these big emotions and we're not taking the time to help them feel seen, we're not responding to their emotions, and their cry is their way of saying like, I need you right now. And it might not be a hug. It might not be space. It might not be like being close to them, but just letting them know, okay, fine. You don't want me to hold you or hug you. I'm going to stay close. Let me know when you need me. Just that kind of language around it, and being sensitive towards their emotions. So I see you're really mad right now, but like, you still can't have a cookie. You can scream and cry. That's okay. I'll wait for you, but don't, they're not hurting anybody, but you're still not getting that cookie. And it's hard for us as parents to do that. So when it comes to letting them cry, we're not addressing any of that is very clear in research that we need to do with our kids. So for me, that's what leads me into saying we need to address it. It doesn't have to be, it's not to say that there aren't moments where it's the end of the day and we've had enough and it's been the same situation over and over again. Our cup might be empty. And if it is, it's okay to have a moment where you're like, I've helped you as much as I can. And right now my cup is empty and I can't help you. I have no more energy. I have nothing left to help you. I'm going to take a moment. You can cry if you want to, and I'll come and see you after. It's okay to do that. Like our child can know that we also have a certain limit of, whatever it is, capacity, right, for our energy and to help them. But it doesn't mean that we ignore it all the time. We have to address.
I think it's important, like the science there too, that parents need to get is if you ignore a child for long enough and they're crying, they will stop crying. I promise you, they will.
Of course, yeah.
But for the wrong reasons, the reasons we don't want them to stop crying, they're going into a dissociative state where there's so much pain. Their anterior cingulate cortex is saying like, this is so painful. You can't tolerate this anymore. So we're going to go into a state of shutdown where you don't feel anything anymore. So we're knocking out all the feelings, not just one feeling. We knock them all out. And we go into shutdown. And that's not good either. Like it's more tolerable in that moment for a parent not to have the crying. Yeah. But that child is learning to tune out from their bodies and to tune out from their feelings. And that leads to depression and all kinds of yucky stuff long term.
Especially when that's repeated within the home. So again, if you've never done that and you have a moment where you're about to lose it, it's okay. But if that's repeated and that's the way you address your child's feelings, there are consequences to that. And you've said it very well. And we have to be aware of that. We often, like a lot of parents will say when I talk about, let's say, spanking or certain things on my platform, it's like, I turned out okay. And I always go back with, but how do you regulate your emotions? Because it's, what do you mean? Okay, answer. Your career, to me, they always bring up their career. And I'm not judging, but I'm trying to say as a whole, as a society, can we come together and accept the fact that we all need to help our kids? And we all want this for our kids. We want to help them learn how to manage big emotions so that when they're older, their mental health will be better. They'll be able to manage relationships a lot better with friends, with partners, with work and colleagues, right? Like, it starts now. We need to really help them with that. And we don't want them to internalize. We don't want them to think that they're not important enough or that their emotions aren't important enough to share. We want them to say like, I feel this way right now. We want them to communicate that. So I think we really need to come together. I don't know why we're still trying to convince people sometimes, but we do need to work on that. And ignoring is not going to teach them anything when it comes to their emotions.
That's beautiful. I love it. So when we do it when they're 3 and we say, I see you, they're more likely to sit in a boardroom one day and give their opinion because they have had that experience again and again of being heard, of their voice being important. Cindy, we absolutely love your work. The Curious Neuron can be found on Instagram. It's a podcast and it's also an app. In my own parenting and professional journey, it's been absolutely instrumental.
We have so much more to share with you at ICP. And whether you're looking for parenting support or you're a professional looking for strategies to help children who are struggling with their mental health, we have the answers you're looking for. At ICP, we offer a unique membership program that gives you access to over 60 accredited online courses and past conference workshops offered by the top experts on the planet, and also provides a community platform where you can connect with like-minded professionals and parents, sharing ideas, resources, as well as advice from the ICP team of professionals. You can access our courses and workshops through your desktop or through our app, offered exclusively to our members. Please go to icphelps.com to start your journey with us today.